Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Sumaira and I'm going to be talking about Lady is a Vamp, which started off as a talk idea and I'm hoping to transform this into a project at some point. So I've got one slide. On the right side there's a picture of me wearing bright red, and then on the left it says hashtag Lady is a Vamp, and just to flag up that it's important to have the first letter of each word capitalized. It makes people with reliance on screen readers, it makes it easier for us to find that hashtag on Twitter. And talking of Twitter, that's underneath that title, I've got my Twitter handle, which is Sumaira Nassem. So it's capital SUMAIR, capital K, capital NASEEM. I'm gonna stop screen sharing this slide now. This will just make it easier, so I can lock my screen if you just bear with me. Okay. So just a little bit of background about my research. It is quite important to understand from where I speak, and then I want to say a little bit about Bollywood in general, and then move on to this idea of the mistreatment of usually female actors in the 20th century. So I'm particularly interested in from the 1930s to the 1990s, and then I'm going to move on to an area which is more familiar to me, which is disability studies, and finally how Gothic research and disability studies can work together to actors activism, and also think about how we can be more inclusive of visual difference. So my background is disability studies and not transdisciplinary research approaches, and I've been interested in Bollywood as a research topic for a long time, partly because this is the sort of material that I grew up with and was really the only vehicle to access culture that might be both familiar to me and the generations that came before me. So it's quite an important access point for my heritage as someone from a South Indian background, South Asian background. So Bollywood is usually described as films that are made in Mumbai, or previously known as Bombay, and they were primarily made in the Hindi language. It's not to say that film is not made in other languages. In India, there's a lot of languages and a lot of different cinema, but Bollywood has this now global reach across the world. But for me, I was interested more in these what might be considered classical films that I think are more likely to be remembered. So what inspired this talk? I was curious. I love reading vampire fiction, and I went off and let me see if there's vampires in Bollywood. And then I got sidetracked because I was seeing all of this stuff about female actors and vamps and this very particular scope around how these actors were trapped in these characters long after they made those films, and their names became synonymous with these characters. So that's what led me to become interested in why these people were treated in this manner. So I'm going to talk briefly about two Indian actors in particular. So the first is called Silk, and then the second is called Helen, and literally that's what they're known by their first names. And although the latter is really that person's name, the former Silk is not. That's a character that person played, but she took on or she was given that name to be known as moving forward. So if I focus on Silk first, so the way that I came across this actor was not by the characters that she played in films and not by her real name. I came across a poster for a film that was made in 2011 long after her death, and it was a kind of fictionalized version of her life. It was about I'm not sure how much of it's fact or fiction, but the film itself was called Dirty Picture, and the thing that struck me the most about the poster and the way that it was written about it was the description of basically, as I said before, I use a screen reader, so I couldn't see the actual poster itself, but the way that it was described by the caption is I got this image of this lady and these three men holding onto her body, and she's not wearing that many clothes. So that's quite a striking picture to paint. So that leads me to this idea of what is a vamp. It's not a vampire as we know them now. A vamp serves a particular purpose in these films, and they're described often as these creatures that threaten these creatures that threaten the imbalance of the hero and his love interest. So who are these vamps? So they often are caricatured. They're visually described as having loud makeup, and that word loud is quite interesting, and I'll return to that a little bit later on. So as I described the poster before, they're scantily clad, which says a lot for itself. And these characters are, I guess, undersubscribed for the people that want to play them in film. So I read a lot about how once people were typecast into these characters, that's who they played, and that was it. They were not seen as being allowed to play the heroine, they were the antithesis of this other character, which is a good way to understand Vamp, is these other characters, which are the goddess or Devi, which translates, I think, into the same word. So we have these pure characters, and then surprise, surprise, who's allowed to move between these binaries? It's usually the male protagonist. So he's often quite roguish characters, and it's interesting to note the similarities between the behavior that's acceptable for rogue characters, these and these vamps, whereas these vamps have little space to grow as characters. They're not allowed to move into having character growth, whereas these rogue characters get the best of both worlds. I guess they get these relationships with these vamps. So you might remember I mentioned earlier, there's usually a formula to Bollywood film. So there's a lot of music and dancing, and these vamps are often helicoptered in as item girls. Note the word girls. So you might have 5 or 6 songs where you get these ladies brought in to perform elaborate dances, and then you never really see them again, or they are the preserve of these dark and dingy places, bars, and never allowed in the actual proper life of the hero of the piece. So why take interest in the character of these vamps if they're not that important? Well, I think they are, because they tell us a lot about why Bollywood played such an important role in wider society. So one can trace how different stages of Bollywood cinema relates to the different contexts. So 1930s to the 1990s, it's a lot of historical change, and notably the partition of India, and then this nationalism, and this what's often been described as saffronization. So if you don't know what that means, that's the colour saffron, which is often associated with the Hindu clergy. So it's not to be critical of faith itself, is to be understanding that there's this sense of extremism which we see mirrored in the cinematic representation of women actors as vamps. So although these characters conform to this particular typecast, where they're either described as vamps, often allied with villains, they're not often given the role of leading villain even, but they serve as a means to an end, a metaphor of everything that you as a cinema goer must be careful about. So this then leads me to the next part of the talk, to touch on the two concepts of disability studies that I'm really interested in when I look at Bollywood representation. So the first is David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder's narrative prosthesis, and then the second is Stuart Murray's cultural fascination. So if I take those each in turn, the narrative prosthesis in essence means that disability in particular, or in this case difference, or something that troubles the norm, is used as a crutch to tell a wider story. So these characters rarely get viewed in depth. There's a lack of nuance in how their stories are told. They're almost disposable, and I think that speaks to the idea of these ladies, the characters as vamps, and the general mistreatment of these actors. So in that sense, these actors that played these characters often have tragic real life stories. So just a trigger warning. I won't describe this in detail, but I will mention it. So when I mentioned the actor Silk earlier, actors like her died by suicide. So that film I mentioned, the poster that horrified me, dirty picture that romanticizes and almost eroticizes her death on the picture. Forgive my use of that word. The film shows the stories of these three protagonists and how her death affects them rather than her own story per se. So these poor men are bereft and found that she's died, and that's it. Her as a character, even in her own life story, is nothing more as a way to kind of understand these pain and afflictions of others. And then the second concept is about cultural fascination, the idea that we like to be thrilled and horrified and see all of this stuff. So we like to see these vamps on the screen, but they're not for the real world. They're not for our lives. These women belong on the screen as they are, but in real life, in the cultural imagination, in the memory about Bollywood, it's not these characters or these actors are going to be remembered as legends or classical actors. So if you're familiar with Bollywood, they're no Kajal or they're no Amitabh Bachchan. They're just two very well-known actors that you might have guessed don't play vamp characters as a rule. So why am I interested in these two concepts? Because I think they tell us a lot about why these representations of the vamp need to be interrogated. Not only do they threaten to trouble the norm, there's a lot to unpick about the society that these sorts of characters help to depict. So one is around the use of the very specific use of Hindu mythology, where characters are often named after the sort of folklore and the names of goddesses and gods. So characters like might be called rather or Lakshmi, and those would play the Devi character that I mentioned earlier. And these vamps won't be called names like so. And the other thing to note is, like, in contrast to these Devi characters, the actors that were often chosen were either renamed as Silk, that wasn't her name, or Helen, who was an actor that was employed and used as a vamp character because of, quote, this is a quote, for her foreign looks. So she was somebody that was allowed to be slightly different, but only in this very particular context of being a vamp. So I read somewhere, and this blog post was, I think, an obituary, and it compared her to the H-bomb, which is an atomic, which is quite shocking in itself to describe someone in such violent terms. So what do we do with these two concepts and these ladies that are trapped in these representations as loud? Well, I think that as these characters are used in a very particular corner, it's important to figure out who these films have as their target audience. So in that sense, these are not targeted at young women or the average housewife, as the Devi character would suggest. These are targeted at particular groups of people, and in my opinion, they're targeted at the people that would see themselves reflected back as playing the main protagonist. So we have these middle class men that are literate enough to work and access the cinema. Here it's important to know that being able to go to watch a film wouldn't be the preserve of everybody. There would have been a lot of illiteracy, and one would need access to literally pay to go to the cinema, and also this notion that cinema is not for everybody. It's maybe an indulgence. So we have this specific audience member in mind. So what does this giant influencing instrument of Bollywood cinema want to tell this person? Number one, the very particular construction of family, the idea often living in an intergenerational family where one would live with siblings and parents and in-laws and children. So this Vamp character is something that is okay to kind of play with and be a part of your younger self's life, but ultimately they're a threat to this idea of the family and being a good one that follows the faith that's been prescribed to them, and cultural fascination. So this idea that beware of this threat to your family, and this is the prescribed behavior for you. So then this idea of the vamp is used as a crutch to both scare this young man into making the right decisions, but also it absolves him because he's allowed to be human. He's allowed to have nuance in the way that he sees himself on the screen, whereas this flat, one-dimensional, exotic lady that might be encountered belongs in a very small part of his life and must never ever enter the rest of the sphere of public and private lives. And then, as I mentioned, on the other side, this character of the Devi, I think, is more thought out, but again, it's still a way to scare this I guess passive and inactive member of the audience around. This is what you should be looking for in your real life. These are your aspirations, and this is your responsibility to your family and your society too. And these films then are not just a source of entertainment, they're used as a mass ideological tool. And if we think about the numbers of people that this form of media can reach, so even though it wouldn't be accessible to the poorest of people, it still doesn't require you to read or write. These songs alone would be memorable in themselves. And I think that taking all of this into consideration, I'm going to talk briefly about it's not one of my favorite films, it's still kind of the film that brings a lot of these different ideas and characters together. And that is the film Choti Bo. So to translate, that means younger daughter-in-law, or often Choti also means small, which I think is quite fitting for this context. So in this film, we have, as I mentioned, the younger daughter-in-law, and yes, she is the Devi character, but she kind of shows elements of rebellion or vampishness, but of course, once she's married into the character of the Devi, these attributes need to be kind of stripped away, and she needs to conform. And this film also has one of my favourite actresses of all time, Durga, and yeah, she plays the very angry mother-in-law, but just to trouble that idea, she is challenged by surprise, this there's another daughter-in-law and she's not the Devi character, so and just to make this even more complex, there's the character of the father-in-law who's blind, and I think that representation of disability, not visible of course, because actors can never have visible disabilities in Bollywood. That's also why I was so interested in these characters of the Vamp and how they can tell us a lot about how difference is treated, where all of the difference is kind of eradicated and meticulously edited. So in this film, we have these three characters, and then we also have four characters, and then we also have these hapless husbands, the characters that play the sons of the Bindu. So Bindu is the character that Durga plays. So we have these interplay of all these different characters, and this is a good culmination of all of the different roles that vamps can play apart from the item role that I mentioned earlier. And although they're not scary in the sense that we're used to, they're scary enough and horrifying enough to trouble the status quo of what a family should be like, and this role that money plays, and we see the slow creep of how Bollywood was kind of westernized and globalized. And just to round off my talk now, why I cut off my interest in the 1990s is because after that there's a lot of remakes of Hollywood films which I'm not really interested in, and I think that it takes that sort of cinema in a different direction, and after all it's the classic films that we remember. I think I'm going to leave it there, Sam. That's okay.